I caught him tampering with the lock. Linda Mackenzie insisted to the arriving patrol car and waved her arms dramatically at Dr. Raymond Solis, who was standing in his own driveway with house keys and a NASA security badge. Officer Todd Mercer stepped into the bright afternoon light, his long sleeves crisp as he surveyed the neighborhood. In his green button-down and khaki pants, the middle-aged engineer looked more like a professor than a crook. But Mercer had learnt to trust concerned citizens in such neighborhoods. "What is identification?" "Sir, I need to see some identification," he demanded, hand resting on his weapon. All of them were completely wrong about Dr. Solis, whose morning had been spent calibrating defense satellites, and the FBI detail watching him were already moving 2 blocks away. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. As Dr. Raymond Solis turned his key and unlocked his own front door, exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders. The sun was harsh this afternoon as the shadow fell on the lawns of Meadowbrook Heights. He had lived there for 3 years without incident. The green cotton shirt he wore was wrinkled after spending 14 hours at the NASA facility. His khaki pants bore the marks of the long hours spent bent over classified satellite systems that most Americans would never know existed. As Susan Caldwell stared through the blinds almost closed on her window across the street, she pressed close against the glass wearing a red blouse. She did not like the black man who entered that house. She saw him before, of course, just not like this. Her suspicion materialized into behavior today. With a practiced motion, Raymond slid the key into the doorknob to his modest 2-story colonial after many uses. His NASA security badge swung from the lanyard around his neck to catch the afternoon sun as he pushed open the door. The technical specifications in his briefcase would remain classified for decades. Moreover, these had already saved lives in wars the public would never find out about. Susan's fingers quivered as she dialed 911. "A break-in in progress," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A black male is breaking and entering into a home on Maple Street. He's attempting to tinker with the lock, and he's not welcome in this neighborhood." The operator maintained a neutral, professional tone. "Are you sure, ma'am, this person doesn't live there? What is it that you're seeing?" "I know what I'm seeing," Susan snapped, watching as Raymond disappeared inside his own home. He was definitely breaking in. People like him don't live in houses like that. This is a respectable neighborhood. Military sirens wailed within moments as Raymond heard approaching. He looked through his front window and was baffled to see the patrol car in the driveway. Officer Todd Mercer stepped outside to the bright afternoon sun, his long-sleeved uniform clean, and his expression already set. Raymond opened his front door before the officer knocked. His NASA badge was very visible against his green shirt. Having just stepped onto his porch with his house keys jingling in his left hand, he was genuinely perplexed. "I must see some ID," Officer Mercer said, instinctively reaching for his weapon. "Sir, receive a suspicious activity allegation at this address." Raymond's confusion deepened. "Officer, I live here. This is my house." He held up his keys, the metal catching the sunlight. "These are my keys, and this is my NASA security badge. I just got home from work." Susan Caldwell emerged from her house across the street, her red blouse bright against the afternoon shadows. "That's him," she called out, pointing dramatically. "That's the man I saw breaking in." "Ma'am," Officer Mercer acknowledged without taking his eyes off Raymond. "Sir, I still need to see proper identification. Anyone can have keys." Raymond's professional calm began to crack. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but this is my home. I have my driver's license, my NASA badge, my house keys, and neighbors who can vouch for me. What exactly am I being accused of?" "We got a call about a breaking and entering," Mercer said, becoming more aggressive. I have the option of doing this the easy way or the hard way, but you're going to give me some identification and tell me what you're doing here." "I'm doing what every homeowner does," Raymond said, his temper controlled. "I'm coming home from work today." His voice carried the slow precision of someone used to explaining things to skeptical audiences. "I work on secret military projects for NASA. This badge is not something you can fake." Susan approached, her face flushed with anger. "Officer, don't let him deceive you with that excuse. I have been watching this neighborhood for 20 years. Someone like him shouldn't live in a house like this." Without a doubt, he was attempting to gain entry. Although Raymond had been profiled before because of his race, his training for the class had equipped him to deal with that. "I have been living in this house for 3 years, ma'am. I pay my mortgage, mow my lawn, and take part in this community just like everyone else." Officer Mercer's skepticism remained unshaken. "Sir, if you live here, you won't mind if we verify that information. I'm going to need you to step away from the door while I call this in." "Call what in?" Raymond asked, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts at control. "You can call the NASA security office. You can check public records. You can ask any of my neighbors who actually know me. This is harassment based on nothing more than my race." Susan's voice grew shrill. "Don't you dare play the race card. I would have called the police on anyone breaking into a house. It has nothing to do with race." "Then why didn't you simply walk over and introduce yourself like a neighbor would?" Raymond challenged. "Why didn't you consider that a black man with keys and identification might actually belong here?" Officer Mercer stepped between them, his authority asserted through physical presence. "Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands on the patrol car while we sort this out. You're being detained pending investigation." "Detained for what crime?" Raymond demanded, his 3 years of law school before switching to engineering serving him well. "Existing while black in my own driveway? Using my own keys in my own door?" The situation was escalating beyond Officer Mercer's comfort zone. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at 12047 Maple Street. I have an uncooperative suspect claiming to be a homeowner." "Uncooperative?" Raymond's professional composure cracked further. "Officer, I've provided identification, explained my presence, and offered multiple ways to verify my residence. What part of that is uncooperative?" Susan sensed victory in the officer's call for backup. "See, I told you something wasn't right. Real homeowners don't argue with police like this. Real homeowners shouldn't have to prove they belong in their own homes." Raymond shot back, his voice carrying the weight of countless similar encounters throughout his life. Officer Mercer reached for his handcuffs. "Sir, you must follow my orders, or I will lay more charges. Face away and put your hands on the vehicle." Raymond thought of different ways to go. His security clearance prevented him from having any arrests that would compromise his access to secret material. He could not risk jeopardizing his work on satellite defense systems over a racist neighbor's baseless allegation. Every fiber of his being opposed capitulating to injustice. Nevertheless, "I am a federal employee with top secret clearance, officer," he said, as his last argument. "If you arrest me for no reason, it could lead to consequences we may not want. I request please authenticate my identity through channels." Mercer's patience had expired. "That's enough. Turn around now, or I'll add resisting arrest to the charges." "What charges?" Raymond asked desperately. "What crime am I being charged with?" "Trespassing, burglary, and failure to comply with lawful orders," Mercer announced, reaching for his handcuffs. Everyone noticed the sound of vehicles coming at that moment. 3 black SUVs with darkened windows made a right onto Maple Street, moving with the coordinated precision of federal agents. As the lead vehicle got close, the occupants were already scanning. Susan was startled as the unknown vehicles ceased behind the patrol car. "What's going on?" Her confident tone quickly changed. Officer Mercer didn't move, hands still on his handcuffs. As the doors of the first SUV opened, to reveal agents in SWAT gear. The powerhouse physiques and professional demeanor immediately changed the power dynamic in suburbia. Raymond felt a rush of hope, but also dread. His federal protection detail had protocols he wouldn't have been able to understand, but their arrival indicated this was something bigger than a neighborhood dispute. The badge of the lead agent glistened in the afternoon sun as he approached, requesting attention from everyone present. The calm neighborhood had transformed into a federal operations site that none of them knew about. As backup units were redirected and supervisors notified, Officer Mercer's radio crackled with communication. What started as a straightforward call about a possible break-in had turned into something much larger, which would have implications for the entire community. As federal agents approached the sunlit lawn, Raymond realized that their presence may cause chaos in his life and expose the truth about racial profiling, which may disrupt everything in his life. The black SUVs that had appeared at the end of Maple Street weren't just passing through. They rolled forward with purposeful precision, their tinted windows reflecting the bright afternoon sun as they positioned themselves strategically around the scene. Officer Todd Mercer's hand froze halfway to his handcuffs as the first vehicle's doors opened simultaneously, revealing figures that immediately commanded attention. FBI agent Nathaniel Bridges emerged from the lead vehicle, his muscular physique evident beneath his green tactical vest and dark blue jacket. His team followed suit, each agent displaying the kind of physical presence that comes from rigorous federal training. The fluorescent bright daylight cast sharp shadows as they approached, their movements coordinated and professional. FBI, Agent Bridges said, with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking control of a situation. He held his credentials in a leather wallet with a gold badge under the overhead natural light. Agent Nathaniel Bridges, I need everyone to maintain their composure and back away from Dr. Solis right now. Officer Todd Mercer's face went pale beneath his cap. His long-sleeved uniform suddenly felt too tight as sweat began forming under his collar. What? I'm responding to a burglary call. This man was breaking into this house. Officer, I'm ordering you to stand down immediately, Agent Bridges said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Dr. Raymond Solis is under federal protection. He works on classified defense projects that require protective oversight from this agency. Those words illuminated the room as lightning does during a storm. Dr. Raymond Solis had prepared himself for the indignity of having his hands cuffed and being put into a patrol car when his shoulders straightened for the first time since this had commenced. As federal agents closed in to protect him, he suddenly appreciated the significance of his NASA ID card. Protection detail? Officer Mercer stammered, his hand moving away from his weapon as if it had become radioactive. But the call said he was a burglar. Agent Bridges stepped closer to Dr. Raymond Solis, his presence both reassuring and formidable. Dr. Solis, are you unharmed? Has anyone attempted to detain or arrest you? They were about to handcuff me, Dr. Raymond Solis replied, his voice steady despite the emotional whirlwind inside him. I showed them my NASA identification, my house keys, tried to explain that I live here, but nothing you said mattered. Because of what you look like, Agent Bridges finished, his jaw tightening as he assessed the situation. He turned back to Officer Mercer, whose confusion was rapidly transforming into panic. Officer, do you realize you are about to interfere with a federal asset, someone whose work is classified at the highest levels of national security? Susan Caldwell, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, suddenly exploded into hysterics. Her red blouse seemed to vibrate with her agitation as she pointed frantically at the FBI agents. This is ridiculous. Those badges are fake. He's obviously called his friends to pretend they're federal agents. Real FBI agents don't just show up like this. Agent Bridges shifted his focus toward the woman whose false report had set all this in motion. Ma'am, please take a deep breath and step back away from me. Your call to 911 claiming Dr. Solis was a burglar has created a security breach, which we now must investigate." "Did we have a security breach?" shrieked Susan. "I called the police after I saw someone breaking into my neighbor's home. I had never seen the man before in my life." "Mrs. Caldwell," Dr. Raymond Solis said quietly, his composure remarkable given the circumstances, "I've lived next door to you for 3 years. I've waved to you dozens of times. You've seen me getting my mail, working in my garden, leaving for work every morning." Agent Bridges pulled out his phone and began documenting the scene, his fingers moving efficiently across the device. "Dr. Solis, I apologize for this incident. Our surveillance protocols indicated unusual police activity at your residence, which triggered our response. Can you walk me through exactly what happened here?" Officer Mercer watched this exchange with growing dread, realizing that every word was being recorded and that his career was likely hanging by a thread. "Look, I was just responding to a call. The woman said she saw a break-in. I was doing my job." "Your job," Agent Bridges said, not looking up from his phone, "should have included verifying the identity of the homeowner before assuming criminal activity. Dr. Solis has lived at this address for 3 years. His security clearance file indicates he's been a model citizen and federal employee." More and more people peeped out of their houses to see this amazing sight of agents of the FBI having a confrontation with the police. Elderly neighbors wearing blue jackets shuffled out onto their porches, while younger families congregated at their windows. The bright afternoon sun highlighted everything, and it was impossible to miss the sudden reversal of power that was taking place. Dr. Priya Lawson, colleague of NASA's Dr. Raymond Solis, drives up in her sedan just as Agent Bridges is detailing the federal implications. Wearing a green blouse and blue slacks, a NASA ID placard visibly stood out when one professional stepped out to greet the group. "Raymond, what's happening here?" Dr. Lawson asked, though the scene before her made the situation fairly clear. "Security called me saying there was an incident at your residence." Agent Bridges introduced himself to Dr. Lawson, who immediately provided additional context about Dr. Raymond Solis's work and importance to national security. "Dr. Solis is one of our most valuable engineers," she explained to the gathering crowd. "His work on satellite defense systems is classified, but I can say that his contributions to national security are immeasurable." Susan Caldwell's face contorted with disbelief and rage. "This is all made up. You're all in on some elaborate scheme. I know what I saw, and I know this neighborhood." "Ma'am," Agent Bridges said, his patience clearly being tested, "I'm going to need you to provide identification and explain exactly what you thought you witnessed. Filing false reports that interfere with federal personnel is a serious matter." Officer Mercer's radio crackled to life as Agent Bridges contacted the police department directly. "This is FBI agent Nathaniel Bridges requesting immediate contact with Captain Monica Ashford. We have a situation involving one of your officers and a federal asset that requires command-level intervention." Those words bore heavily over Officer Mercer like someone draping a blanket over him. Government property intervention at command level. The police department did not typically make note of such words in those types of reports, and he knew the upper echelon would be taking a look at this. Dr. Raymond Solis saw more neighbors come and go. Some he recognized and others who had never really looked at him until that day. He realized it was ironic that federal agents treating him with courtesy made his neighbors deemable enough for attention. Agent Bridges refocused his attention on the man at the center of this incident. "Dr. Solis," he said, "I want you to know that this breach of your security will be investigated. No one working on your classification of project should have to deal with harassment or false accusations." It was an overwhelming validation. Dr. Raymond Solis had been working quietly for years, helping out with projects that protected American interests across the globe without asking for credit or special favors. At this moment, as the federal agents went through nearly everything ever done to him, He knew something had been achieved at the top. Agent Bridges went on to photograph and document Officer Mercer's patrol car, badge number, and everyone's position. I need your full name and badge number and the exact content of the call you received, officer, cause all your actions here will be reviewed by federal civil rights investigators. The neighborhood looked like a crime scene, with federal agents protecting a resident from the local police officers, while children looked through the windows and parents hushed themselves with their comments, wondering how the peaceful suburb had turned into the epicenter of such a brawl. While Agent Bridges was finishing his first report, the sound of another vehicle approaching indicated that someone else had come to the scene. With the shining sun in the afternoon, the turn of events changed from a mere case of racial profiling into a federal case. Dr. Raymond Solis stood in the federal protections he earned and suspected after a lifetime of service, while those who dismissed him and targeted him suffered the consequences of their vicious bad acts. The balance of power on Maple Street had been permanently altered, and everyone there knew it would never be the same again. The humiliation that occurred under the sunlight now migrated towards his vindication that Dr. Raymond Solis, who was supposed to be identified with the facts in various ways that would change not just this incident, but also the identity of the community's own. Agent Nathaniel Bridges adjusted his tactical vest under the bright afternoon sun, his muscular frame casting a shadow across the suburban sidewalk as he stepped closer to the group. The fluorescent streetlights above mixed with natural daylight, creating perfect visibility for what was about to unfold. His green tactical shirt stretched across his broad shoulders as he pulled out a secure phone, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "Officer Mercer, I need you to understand something very clearly," Agent Bridges began, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "Dr. Raymond Solis isn't just any NASA employee. He's a principal engineer working on our most advanced satellite defense systems. His work directly impacts national security operations that I cannot fully discuss in this setting." Dr. Raymond Solis felt a mixture of vindication and concern wash over him. His blue jacket hung neatly over his orange polo shirt as he stood straighter, watching Officer Todd Mercer's face slowly drain of color. The long-sleeved police uniform that had seemed so authoritative moments before now appeared insignificant against the backdrop of federal intervention. "That's impossible," Susan Caldwell shrieked from behind her screen door, her red blouse visible through the mesh as she pressed closer to listen. "People like him don't work on anything important. You're all making this up." Agent Bridges' muscles tensed, his eyes trained on the house, jaw setting. "Ma'am, the fact that you insist on interfering with surveillance operations creates a security risk. Dr. Solis is being watched for protection because individuals like you have a track record of harassment, which affects his work." Officer Todd Mercer began shaking in a small way as realization of his mistake hit home. He looked in his cuffs, which were only partially drawn, and the several FBI agents who were getting into position. "I was responding to an authentic call about a burglary. I had no way of knowing that." "You had every way of knowing," Agent Bridges interrupted firmly. "Dr. Solis showed you his NASA identification, his house keys, and attempted to explain his residence here multiple times. Instead of conducting proper verification, you chose to escalate based on assumptions." The sound of a car door slamming drew everyone's attention as Dr. Priya Lawson hurried across the street, her professional navy blue blazer and matching slacks making her NASA credentials immediately apparent. Her red scarf fluttered in the afternoon breeze as she approached with a concerned expression, carrying a leather briefcase that clearly contained official documentation. "Raymond, are you all right?" Dr. Lawson called out, her voice filled with both worry and authority. "Security alerted me about a situation at your residence. I came immediately." Agent Bridges nodded respectfully toward Dr. Lawson. "Dr. Lawson, I presume." "Agent Nathaniel Bridges, FBI Protective Detail." We have a situation involving harassment of Dr. Solis that has escalated beyond local jurisdiction. Dr. Lawson's expression hardened as she took in the scene, her eyes moving from Officer Todd Mercer's defensive posture to Susan Caldwell peering through her screen door. "Officer, do you have any idea what you've done? Dr. Raymond Solis is one of our most valuable assets. His current project involves satellite defense systems that protect American interests across 6 continents." "That's ridiculous," Susan Caldwell shouted, finally stepping onto her porch in her red blouse and dark slacks. "He's just trying to make himself sound important. I know what I saw." Dr. Lawson opened her briefcase with practiced precision, pulling out official NASA documentation. Dr. Solis graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a PhD in aerospace engineering. He holds 17 patents in satellite communication and defense technology. His current clearance level requires federal protection because his work is classified at the highest levels. Officer Todd Mercer felt his stomach drop as he began to understand the magnitude of his error. There was no way for me to verify. The call came in as a burglary in progress. The call came from a woman with a documented history of racially motivated complaints, Agent Bridges stated coldly. A history that federal surveillance has been tracking because it interfered with our protective operations. The sound of another vehicle arriving drew attention as Frank Caldwell's pickup truck pulled into the driveway next door. A middle-aged man in an orange work shirt and blue jeans stepped out, initially wearing an expression of support for his wife that quickly changed as he took in the scene before him. "Susan, what's going on here?" Frank called out, but his voice lost confidence as he noticed the FBI agents and official government presence surrounding his neighbor. "Frank, thank God you're here," Susan called desperately. "They're all lying about him. Tell them what we discussed about people like him moving into our neighborhood." Frank Caldwell's face went pale as he looked between the federal agents and his wife. "Susan, stop talking. Right now." Agent Bridges stepped toward the newcomer. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Agent Nathaniel Bridges, FBI. Your wife's actions today have interfered with federal protective operations and potentially compromised national security personnel. I strongly advise that she cease making statements without legal counsel present." Dr. Raymond Solis watched the exchange with growing confidence, finally seeing the respect and recognition he deserved. His years of dedication to protecting American interests were finally being acknowledged, even under these unfortunate circumstances. "Dr. Solis," Dr. Lawson continued, addressing the gathered crowd that was beginning to form. "Perhaps people should understand exactly what your work means. The satellite systems you've developed have prevented 3 major cyber attacks on our infrastructure in the past year alone. Your encryption protocols protect military communications worldwide." Officer Todd Mercer's radio crackled to life, and he answered with a shaking voice. "Officer Mercer here. Todd, this is Captain Ashford. I'm en route to your location immediately. Do not take any further action until I arrive. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am. Captain Ashford is coming," Officer Mercer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Agent Bridges nodded approvingly. "Good. Captain Monica Ashford is someone we can work with. She understands the gravity of federal jurisdiction." Frank Caldwell went to the porch where his wife sat with the orange work shirt wet with perspiration, despite the coolness of the hour. "Susan, you must go inside and call a lawyer." "Now." "I don't need a lawyer," Susan screamed, her red blouse having wrinkles from pressing against the screen door. "I contacted law enforcement after spotting suspicious behavior, as a good neighbor would do." Dr. Lawson's professional demeanor remained steady as she addressed Susan directly. "Ma'am, what you saw was a distinguished scientist and patriot entering his own home after working 12-hour days to protect this country. Dr. Solis has sacrificed personal time, family gatherings, and social activities to ensure that Americans can sleep safely at night." Agent Bridges checked his watch and spoke into his radio. "Control, We need a full background brief prepared for local law enforcement. Include Dr. Solis's commendations, current project classifications, and protective status documentation. The growing crowd of neighbors began murmuring among themselves as word spread about their neighbor's true identity. Children pointed curiously at the FBI vehicles, while adults whispered about the unprecedented scene unfolding in their quiet subdivision. Dr. Raymond Solis felt a surge of pride mixed with frustration as he realized how his contributions had been hidden from the very community he protected. Agent Bridges, may I address this situation directly? Of course, Dr. Solis. This is your neighborhood, your home. The sunlight was blinding Dr. Raymond Solis as he took a step forward and turned to his audience. Neighbors, I've been living here for 3 years. I have waved with you, helped you with snow removal, and tried to be an all-around good member of our community. I've never spoken about my work because it's classified, but I want you to know that everything I am involved with is aimed at protecting American families, and that includes yours too. The murmur in the air became sturdier as the crowd began to realize their neighbor's reality. A few residents nodded with respect. Others looked ashamed of their previous actions. Captain Monica Ashford's patrol car arrived with lights flashing but no sirens, and a stern-looking woman in a crisp police uniform stepped out. Her authoritative presence was immediately apparent as she approached the scene, taking in the federal agents and the obvious tension. Agent Bridges, I'm Captain Monica Ashford. I apologize for this incident and any interference with federal operations, she said, extending her hand professionally. Agent Bridges shook her hand firmly. Captain, we appreciate your prompt response. Dr. Solis is under federal protection, and today's events constitute a serious breach of security protocols. Captain Ashford turned to Officer Todd Mercer, her expression severe. Officer Mercer, you are immediately suspended pending full investigation. Badge and weapon, now. Officer Todd Mercer's hands shook as he removed his badge and unholstered his service weapon, the reality of his career consequences finally hitting home. Captain, I was just responding to a call. You were ignoring evidence and escalating based on bias, Captain Ashford stated firmly. That ends today. She turned to Dr. Raymond Solis with genuine respect. Dr. Solis, on behalf of the police department, I offer my sincerest apologies. This should never have happened, and we will take immediate steps to ensure it never happens again. Dr. Raymond Solis nodded happily with his vindication as the sun crept behind the trees on the front lawn. At long last, the truth came into the open and recognition was bestowed upon him. The secret was now out in the open, and all that was going to change. The morning sunlight cast long shadows across the suburban street as another unmarked sedan pulled up to the curb. Detective Clifton Ramos emerged, a seasoned investigator in his green polo shirt and blue jacket, carrying a thick manila folder that seemed to weigh more than paper should. The fluorescent security lights from the nearby houses mixed with the natural daylight, creating an almost theatrical brightness over the scene that had already drawn half the neighborhood. Agent Nathaniel Bridges approached Detective Ramos with professional courtesy, though his muscular frame remained tense beneath his tactical gear. Detective, I assume you have the background information we requested on the complainant. Detective Ramos nodded grimly, patting the folder. More than you're going to want to hear, Agent Bridges. This isn't Susan Caldwell's first rodeo, and it's not even close. He glanced toward where Susan Caldwell stood near her front porch, her red blouse now wrinkled and stained with perspiration, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and growing panic. Dr. Raymond Solis, still standing near his own front door in his navy blue NASA polo and khaki slacks, felt a chill despite the warm afternoon air. What do you mean it's not her first time? Detective Ramos opened the folder, revealing a stack of police reports, incident numbers, and complaint forms that seemed to go on forever. Dr. Solis, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're the seventh person Susan Caldwell has called the police on in the past 18 months. And that's just the recent activity." The words hit Dr. Raymond Solis like a physical blow. His analytical mind, so accustomed to processing complex data and satellite trajectories, struggled to comprehend the systematic nature of what Detective Ramos was revealing. Seven people. "Let me walk you through this," Detective Ramos said, flipping through the reports with practiced efficiency. March 2023, she called about Marcus Washington, a black pool maintenance worker who was servicing the Henderson's pool 3 houses down, claimed he was acting suspicious and probably casing houses for later break-ins. Agent Nathaniel Bridges stepped closer, his expression growing darker. Was the complaint investigated? Detective Ramos glanced at Officer Todd Mercer, who had gone pale beneath his long-sleeved uniform. Officer Mercer responded to that call. According to his report, he questioned Mr. Washington for 20 minutes, demanded to see his work credentials 3 times, and told him to be more mindful of how his presence might be perceived in a nice neighborhood like this. Dr. Raymond Solis felt his stomach turn. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that a black man working honestly should somehow minimize his own existence to make white neighbors comfortable, struck him with unexpected force. "There's more," Detective Ramos continued. April 2023, Amazon delivery driver named James Carter. Susan Caldwell called claiming he was loitering suspiciously because he spent 30 seconds looking at house numbers to confirm the correct address. Officer Mercer responded again. Captain Monica Ashford, who had been listening with increasing concern, stepped forward. Her blue uniform jacket was crisp despite the morning's tension, and her expression was grim. What was the disposition of that complaint? Officer Mercer detained Mr. Carter for 15 minutes. Searched his delivery truck, and warned him about taking too long at addresses in residential neighborhoods. Detective Ramos read from the report. Mr. Carter filed a complaint with Amazon about the incident, but nothing came of it. The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. Dr. Raymond Solis found himself thinking about all the times he'd come home from long days at NASA, tired and focused on his work, unaware that his very presence was being monitored and reported by someone who saw his skin color as inherently criminal. A voice from across the street interrupted the growing tension. "Excuse me, officers, but I think you need to hear my story too." Everyone turned to see Lucia Moreno approaching, a woman in her 40s, wearing a red cardigan over dark slacks. Her face set with determination, despite obvious nervousness. She lived in the blue house with white trim 2 doors down from Dr. Raymond Solis, and he recognized her from their occasional friendly waves. "Mrs. Moreno," Agent Nathaniel Bridges acknowledged. "You have information relevant to this investigation?" Lucia Moreno nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "Susan Caldwell has been terrorizing my family for 2 years. She's called the police on my teenage son Miguel at least 4 times that I know of. Once for walking home from school through the neighborhood. Once for sitting in our own front yard doing homework. Once for having friends over on a Saturday afternoon." Dr. Raymond Solis felt a wave of anger building in his chest. The kind of controlled fury that came from understanding how systematic and deliberate this harassment had been. "Mrs. Moreno, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. The worst part," Lucia Moreno continued, her voice growing stronger, "is how it's affected my children. My daughter Maria, she's only 12, and she asks me why the police keep coming to our house. She started having nightmares about being arrested for walking to her friend's house." Detective Ramos flipped through more pages in his folder. "Mrs. Moreno, I see multiple reports here involving your family. May 2023, July 2023, September 2023, and January of this year." Agent Nathaniel Bridges turned his attention to Officer Todd Mercer, whose face had gone from pale to almost gray. "Officer Mercer, how did you handle these complaints involving the Moreno family?" Officer Todd Mercer's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I responded according to protocol. I investigated each complaint thoroughly. Thoroughly, Captain Monica Ashford repeated, her tone carrying dangerous undertones. Define thoroughly, Officer Mercer. I questioned the subjects, verified their reasons for being in the area, and advised them about community standards, Officer Todd Mercer said, the words sounding rehearsed and hollow. Dr. Priya Lawson, Dr. Raymond Solis's NASA colleague, who had been quietly observing in her professional blue jacket and dark slacks, stepped forward with scientific precision. Officer Mercer, in your professional opinion, what pattern do you notice among the people Susan Caldwell has reported? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Officer Todd Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly unwilling to state the obvious racial pattern that everyone could see. Agent Nathaniel Bridges filled the silence. Detective Ramos, what else does your investigation reveal? June 2023. She called about the Rodriguez family's nephew visiting from college, claimed he was prowling around looking for unlocked cars. August 2023. Complained about a black real estate agent showing a house to prospective buyers. Said she was concerned about the type of people being attracted to the neighborhood. Dr. Raymond Solis felt the weight of systematic harassment settling over him like a suffocating blanket. Each incident represented a person going about their legitimate business only to be criminalized for existing while black or brown in a space that Susan Caldwell had apparently decided belonged exclusively to white people. The most disturbing part, Detective Ramos continued, is that every single one of these complaints was unfounded. Not one resulted in any criminal activity being discovered. Not one person was actually doing anything wrong. Susan Caldwell, who had been growing increasingly agitated during the revelations, suddenly exploded. This is ridiculous. I was protecting my neighborhood. I was being a responsible citizen. Agent Nathaniel Bridges turned his steady gaze toward her. Mrs. Caldwell, you filed false police reports, systematically targeting people of color. That's not citizenship, that's harassment. They didn't belong here, Susan Caldwell shouted, her red blouse now completely disheveled. This is a good neighborhood, a safe neighborhood, and people like that bring down property values and increase crime. The mask had finally slipped completely. Dr. Raymond Solis stared at his neighbor, a woman he'd occasionally exchanged polite greetings with, and saw the raw hatred that had been driving her surveillance of his daily life. Lucia Moreno stepped closer, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. People like what, Susan? People like my son who gets straight A's and volunteers at the animal shelter? People like Dr. Solis who's protecting our country with his work? Detective Ramos closed his folder with a snap that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Mrs. Caldwell, based on this pattern of false reports and the racial bias evident in your targeting, you're looking at potential charges for filing false police reports, harassment, and interfering with federal operations. Agent Nathaniel Bridges added another layer of consequences. Mrs. Caldwell, your repeated calls about Dr. Raymond Solis triggered federal attention because they interfered with our surveillance protocols. You've been unwittingly compromising national security operations. Dr. Raymond Solis found his voice, though it came out strained with controlled anger. Susan, for 2 years I've lived next door to you, thinking we had a normal neighborly relationship. I helped you carry groceries when you hurt your back. I signed for packages when you weren't home. And all that time you were watching me, waiting for any excuse to call the police on me. The betrayal cut deeper than the racism itself. Dr. Raymond Solis realized that every friendly interaction had been a performance. Every smile from Susan Caldwell had masked a surveillance operation designed to catch him in some imagined wrongdoing. Captain Monica Ashford stepped toward Officer Todd Mercer, her expression stern. Officer Mercer, your handling of these complaints shows a clear pattern of bias and failure to conduct proper investigations. You're suspended pending a full internal affairs review. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh light over the suburban street, The scope of systematic prejudice became undeniable. Dr. Raymond Solis stood surrounded by federal agents, police officials, and neighbors, processing the revelation that his quiet existence had been under hostile surveillance simply because of the color of his skin. The truth was finally emerging. But Dr. Raymond Solis knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The bright afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the suburban street as Captain Monica Ashford stepped forward, her police uniform crisp and authoritative under the natural light. Her voice carried the weight of institutional responsibility as she addressed the gathered crowd of neighbors, FBI agents, and media personnel who had transformed the quiet residential area into a bustling scene of accountability. "Officer Mercer, you are hereby suspended from active duty pending a full internal investigation," Captain Ashford announced, her words cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. "Your badge and service weapon will be surrendered immediately." Officer Todd Mercer's face drained of color beneath the overhead fluorescent lighting from nearby street lamps that had automatically activated. His long-sleeved uniform suddenly felt heavy and constraining as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him. The confident swagger he had displayed earlier when confronting Dr. Raymond Solis had evaporated completely, replaced by the stark recognition that his career was crumbling in real time. Agent Nathaniel Bridges stepped beside Captain Ashford, his muscular frame imposing in his tactical gear as he consulted a tablet device. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation is initiating civil rights violation procedures under Section 242 of Title 18, he declared with professional precision. "Interfering with federal personnel under protective detail constitutes a serious breach of federal law." Dr. Raymond Solis watched these proceedings with a mixture of vindication and disbelief. After years of subtle discrimination and microaggressions in his professional life, seeing institutional power mobilize so decisively in his defense felt almost surreal. He adjusted his green-collared shirt and straightened his blue jacket, maintaining the dignified composure that had served him well throughout his distinguished career. Susan Caldwell stood frozen on her front lawn, her red blouse wrinkled from nervous perspiration as the magnitude of her actions became clear. The comfortable world of unchallenged prejudice she had constructed was collapsing around her with devastating swiftness. "This is ridiculous," she protested weakly to anyone who would listen. "I was just being a concerned neighbor. How was I supposed to know?" Frank Caldwell emerged from their house wearing an orange polo shirt and dark slacks, his expression grim as he surveyed the chaos his wife had created. The federal agents, police vehicles, and growing crowd of onlookers painted a picture of consequences he had never imagined when he had passively enabled Susan's complaints over the years. He approached Agent Bridges hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Agent Bridges, I need you to understand that I never supported my wife's calls to police," Frank said, deliberately positioning himself several steps away from Susan. "I told her repeatedly that Dr. Solis seemed like a perfectly respectable neighbor, but she wouldn't listen to reason." Agent Bridges regarded Frank with professional neutrality while making notes on his tablet. "Your level of involvement will be determined during the federal investigation, Mr. Caldwell. I suggest you consult with legal counsel before making any further statements." The implications of Frank's public distancing were not lost on Susan, who turned toward her husband with desperation evident in her voice. "Frank, you can't seriously be abandoning me now. We're supposed to be a team. I was protecting our neighborhood, protecting our property values. You were harassing our neighbors based on their race," Frank replied firmly, his years of silent complicity finally giving way to moral clarity. "I won't be party to that anymore, Susan. I won't let your prejudice destroy what's left of our reputation in this community." Dr. Priya Lawson arrived at the scene in her professional navy blazer and matching skirt, carrying a leather briefcase that contained documentation of Dr. Solis's classified work. Her presence added another layer of institutional credibility to the unfolding drama as neighbors began gathering in small groups, eager to understand how their quiet suburban street had become the center of a federal investigation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Lawson announced to the growing crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing government officials. "I want you to understand exactly who Dr. Raymond Solis is and why his harassment represents a matter of national security concern." The neighbors moved closer, their curiosity overcoming any discomfort they might have felt about the unprecedented scene playing out before them. Mrs. Patterson from across the street wore her blue jacket despite the warm weather, while younger neighbors had gathered in their casual clothes, everyone straining to hear Dr. Lawson's explanation. Dr. Solis holds multiple advanced degrees from MIT and has spent the last 15 years developing satellite defense systems that protect American military communications worldwide. Dr. Lawson continued, his work has directly contributed to technologies that have saved countless lives in combat situations and prevented foreign interference with critical infrastructure systems. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as neighbors processed this information. Many of them had lived near Dr. Solis for years without knowing the true nature of his contributions to national security. The realization that they had a genuine hero living among them, while one of their own had been systematically harassing him, created a palpable sense of shame and awakening. The satellite encryption protocols Dr. Solis developed are currently protecting communications for over 200,000 military personnel deployed globally, Dr. Lawson added, her voice rising with pride. His innovations in signal processing have enhanced the security of everything from drone operations to nuclear submarine communications. Agent Bridges nodded approvingly at Dr. Lawson's presentation before addressing the crowd himself. "What you need to understand is that Dr. Solis's work makes him a high-value target for foreign intelligence services. His protection isn't just about his personal safety. It's about protecting American technological advantages that keep our nation secure." The Homeowners Association president, Margaret Torres, pushed through the crowd wearing her characteristic red cardigan and pearl necklace. Her usual composure was severely shaken as she grasped the implications of having a federal investigation centered in their neighborhood. "Agent Bridges, what does this mean for our community? Will there be ongoing federal presence here?" "That depends entirely on whether incidents like today's continue to occur," Agent Bridges replied diplomatically. "Federal protective details prefer to operate invisibly, but when local harassment interferes with our operations, we're forced to take more visible action." The sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention as news vans from local television stations began arriving at the scene. The transformation from private neighborhood dispute to public spectacle was happening with remarkable speed, driven by the irresistible combination of federal law enforcement, racial profiling allegations, and classified government work. Channel 7's senior reporter Jessica Martinez stepped out of the lead news van, her red blazer and professional demeanor immediately commanding attention. She quickly assessed the scene before approaching Agent Bridges with practiced confidence. "Agent Bridges, I'm Jessica Martinez with Channel 7 News. Can you confirm that the FBI is investigating racial profiling of a federal employee?" Agent Bridges maintained his professional composure while considering his response carefully. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation takes any interference with federal personnel very seriously. We're conducting a thorough investigation of today's incident and will provide appropriate information as the case develops." Dr. Raymond Solis watched the media attention with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. He had spent his career working behind the scenes, contributing to national security without public recognition or acclaim. The prospect of speaking publicly about his experience represented both an opportunity for justice and a significant departure from his preferred anonymity. Jessica Martinez approached Dr. Solis with respectful professionalism, recognizing the significance of the moment. "Dr. Solis, would you be willing to share your perspective on what happened here today? I understand this may be difficult, but your voice could be important for others facing similar situations." Dr. Solis straightened his blue jacket and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility for speaking not just for himself, but for countless other professionals who had faced similar discrimination in silence. "I'll speak with you, Miss Martinez. I think it's time people understood what racial profiling looks like when it happens to someone who has dedicated their life to serving this country." The impromptu interview setup drew neighbors closer as they recognized they were witnessing a potentially historic moment. Dr. Solis's willingness to speak publicly represented a turning point, not just in his own story, but in the broader conversation about racism in professional communities. Dr. Solis, can you describe what it feels like to have your patriotism and contributions questioned simply because of your race? Jessica Martinez asked, her microphone positioned to capture his response clearly. "What happened here today wasn't an isolated incident," Dr. Solis began, his voice steady and thoughtful. "It's the culmination of years of subtle discrimination that Black professionals face every day. We're questioned, doubted, and treated with suspicion, even when we've proven ourselves repeatedly through our work and achievements." He paused, gathering his thoughts while neighbors listened with rapt attention. Many were hearing him speak at length for the first time, despite years of living in the same community. "I've spent 15 years protecting American interests through my work at NASA. I hold security clearances that required extensive background investigations. I own my home, pay my taxes, and contribute to this community. But none of that mattered when Officer Mercer saw me as just another Black man who didn't belong." Susan Caldwell stood apart from the crowd, her isolation becoming more pronounced as neighbors actively avoided eye contact with her. The comfortable social position she had enjoyed in the community was eroding in real time as people processed the reality of her actions and their consequences. Officer Todd Mercer remained near his patrol vehicle under Agent Bridges' watchful supervision, his career and reputation crumbling with each passing minute. The confident authority he had wielded earlier when confronting Dr. Solis now seemed like a distant memory as federal agents documented his misconduct for civil rights violation proceedings. Captain Ashford approached Dr. Solis during a break in his media interview, her expression conveying both professional responsibility and personal regret. "Dr. Solis, on behalf of the police department, I want to apologize for Officer Mercer's conduct today. His actions don't represent our values or training standards." "I appreciate that, Captain Ashford," Dr. Solis replied diplomatically. "But I hope you understand that Officer Mercer's behavior reflects broader systemic issues that need to be addressed. This can't be dismissed as one bad officer making a mistake." "You're absolutely right," Captain Ashford acknowledged. "We're implementing immediate policy reviews and additional bias training for all officers. Your experience today will help us identify gaps in our procedures and make necessary improvements." Dr. Lawson joined their conversation, carrying documentation that further illustrated Dr. Solis's professional achievements. "Captain, I want to make sure you understand the broader implications of today's incident. Dr. Solis's work is directly connected to ongoing military operations worldwide. When your officer threatened to arrest him, he was potentially compromising national security operations." The weight of this revelation settled over Captain Ashford like a heavy blanket. The realization that racial profiling had nearly resulted in the arrest of a key national security asset added federal implications to what might otherwise have been handled as a local civil rights matter. Margaret Torres approached the group with obvious distress written across her features. "Dr. Solis, I owe you a profound apology on behalf of our Homeowners Association. We should have addressed Susan's pattern of complaints years ago, instead of allowing this harassment to continue unchallenged." "Mrs. Torres, the failure wasn't just individual," Dr. Solis replied thoughtfully. "It was systemic. When someone repeatedly makes racially motivated complaints and faces no consequences, the entire community becomes complicit in enabling that behavior." Agent Bridges concluded his documentation of the scene while coordinating with federal prosecutors who would be handling the civil rights violation case. The speed and thoroughness of the federal response stood in stark contrast to years of ignored complaints from other victims of Susan Caldwell's harassment. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, the scene on the quiet suburban street had transformed completely. What began as a routine racist harassment incident had evolved into a federal investigation with national security implications, media coverage, and community-wide reckoning with systemic racism. The arrival of additional federal vehicles signaled that this story was far from over. Dr. Raymond Solis's decision to speak publicly about his experience had opened a door that couldn't be closed, creating momentum for broader conversations about discrimination in professional communities and the importance of protecting those who serve their country behind the scenes. The contrast between years of ignored complaints and the immediate federal response when a protected asset was threatened illustrated the complex dynamics of institutional power and racial justice in America. Dr. Solis's story was becoming larger than his individual experience, representing hope for accountability and change in communities across the nation. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the CNN newsroom as anchor Patricia Williams adjusted her red blazer and looked directly into the camera. Behind her, a graphic displayed the headline, "NASA engineer harassed by neighbor and police in federal protection incident." Good morning, I'm Patricia Williams, and we begin today with a story that's sending shockwaves through both the scientific community and law enforcement agencies nationwide. Dr. Raymond Solis, a brilliant NASA engineer working on classified defense systems, found himself handcuffed in his own driveway yesterday after a racist neighbor falsely reported him as a burglar. What happened next has federal authorities calling it a civil rights violation of national security proportions. The screen cut to footage from the previous day, showing Dr. Raymond Solis in his green polo shirt and dark slacks, speaking calmly to reporters, while FBI agent Nathaniel Bridges stood protectively nearby in his tactical gear. The bright afternoon sunlight illuminated the scene as Dr. Solis's measured words carried the weight of years of hidden frustration. "I've dedicated my entire career to protecting this country through my work at NASA," Dr. Solis had said, his voice steady but emotional. "To be treated as a criminal in my own neighborhood, despite showing my keys, my badge, and clear evidence of my residence, reveals how deeply embedded racial bias continues to affect even the most accomplished members of our community." Across town, in her immaculate living room, Susan Caldwell clutched a cup of coffee with shaking hands as she watched the coverage. Her red cardigan seemed to clash with her pale, drawn face as she saw herself portrayed as the villain in a story now reaching millions of viewers. Her husband Frank sat in stony silence, his orange shirt wrinkled from a sleepless night, spent fielding calls from reporters and angry neighbors. "Turn it off," Susan whispered. But Frank's attention remained fixed on the screen as footage showed her pointing accusingly at Dr. Solis while making her initial false report. Her voice, captured by a neighbor's phone, rang out clearly. "People like him don't belong in this neighborhood. I know suspicious when I see it." The doorbell rang, and Frank opened it to find a stern woman in a navy blue suit holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm Janet Morrison, the attorney you contacted. We need to discuss damage control immediately." As Janet Morrison entered, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, Susan desperately tried to explain her position. "I was just being a concerned neighbor. Anyone would have called the police, seeing a man they didn't recognize trying to get into a house." Janet Morrison's expression remained skeptical as she spread documents across the coffee table. "Mrs. Caldwell, the media has obtained records showing you filed 17 false police reports against Black and Latino residents over the past 5 years. This isn't about being a concerned neighbor. This is about a documented pattern of racial harassment that's now interfered with federal operations." Meanwhile, at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, Dr. Raymond Solis arrived to find his office building surrounded by news vans and reporters. The morning sunlight reflected off their camera equipment as they called out questions. Security guards in their standard-issue uniforms escorted him through the crowd. But he paused at the entrance. "Dr. Solis, how does it feel to know your story is inspiring other scientists to speak out about discrimination?" shouted a reporter. Dr. Solis turned, his expression thoughtful. "If my experience can help prevent even one person from enduring what I've faced, then perhaps some good can come from this painful situation. But let's be clear, this isn't just about me. This is about the countless professionals of color who face similar treatment without the protection of federal agents or media attention." Inside the building, Dr. Priya Lawson waited in her green blouse and dark pants, holding a thick folder of documents. Her colleague's ordeal had prompted her to compile a comprehensive record of his contributions to national security, information that was finally being declassified for public release. "Raymond," she said as he approached, "Director Harrison wants to see you immediately, and the Pentagon has authorized us to reveal some details about your work that might help people understand exactly what's at stake here." In the director's conference room, fluorescent lights illuminated a gathering of NASA's top officials. Director Harrison, a distinguished man in his blue suit jacket, stood as Dr. Solis entered. "Raymond, I want you to know that every person in this building is outraged by what happened to you yesterday. We're going public with information about your contributions because the American people deserve to understand the caliber of scientist who was being treated as a criminal." Dr. Priya Lawson opened her folder and began reading from a prepared statement. "Dr. Raymond Solis holds 14 patents related to satellite communication security. His work on encrypted military communications has been instrumental in protecting American forces overseas. The defensive satellite systems he's currently developing will form the backbone of our national cybersecurity infrastructure for the next decade." The weight of these revelations was already reaching news outlets across the country. At the police station where Officer Todd Mercer had worked for 8 years, internal affairs investigators were building their case while his union representative struggled to craft a defense. Detective Sarah Chen, leading the investigation, spread photos across the interrogation room table under the harsh fluorescent lighting. Officer Mercer sat uncomfortably in his civilian clothes, an orange t-shirt and jeans, having been suspended immediately following the federal intervention. "Todd, we've reviewed your response to 17 calls regarding suspicious persons in the Maple Grove neighborhood over the past 5 years, Detective Chen said. "In every case involving a person of color, you failed to properly investigate before taking aggressive action. In every case involving white individuals, you conducted thorough verification before proceeding. Can you explain this pattern?" Officer Mercer's union representative, a heavy-set man named Carl Waters, shifted nervously in his blue jacket. "My client was following standard protocols for responding to potential break-in calls." Detective Chen slid a photo across the table showing Dr. Solis clearly displaying his house keys and NASA badge. "Standard protocol includes ignoring clear evidence of legitimate residence? Your client was about to arrest a man standing at his own front door with his keys in his hand." Back in the Maple Grove neighborhood, community organizer Lucia Moreno had transformed her living room into a command center for what was becoming a neighborhood reckoning with systemic racism. Wearing her red blouse and dark skirt, she welcomed families who had previously been targeted by Susan Caldwell's false reports. The Martinez family sat on her couch, their teenage son Carlos wearing a green hoodie as he recounted his experience. "Mrs. Caldwell called the police on me 3 times for walking through the neighborhood to visit my girlfriend. Each time, Officer Mercer showed up treating me like I was already guilty of something." Maria Santos, an elderly woman in her blue cardigan, nodded sadly. "She reported my grandson for casing houses when he was delivering my medication from the pharmacy. He was wearing his work uniform and carrying a pharmacy bag, but Officer Mercer still made him sit on the curb in handcuffs while they verified his story. As these testimonies accumulated, Lucia Moreno carefully documented each incident. The pattern emerging was undeniable, a systematic harassment campaign enabled by a police officer who consistently failed to perform due diligence when the suspects were people of color. The story's national implications became clear when FBI Director Harvey Pendleton called an unprecedented press conference, standing behind a podium in the J. Edgar Hoover Building. With bright camera lights illuminating his navy blue suit, he addressed the nation directly. The harassment of Dr. Raymond Solis represents more than an individual civil rights violation. It represents a threat to national security when our most valuable scientific personnel cannot live peacefully in their own communities. Dr. Solis's work on classified defense systems makes him a high-value asset whose safety and security are matters of federal concern. Director Pendleton's words carried weight beyond the immediate situation. When local law enforcement officers ignore evidence and procedure to harass federal personnel based on racial assumptions, they undermine not just civil rights, but national security itself. We will pursue this case with the full resources of the federal government. The ripple effects of this statement reached every corner of the law enforcement community. Police chiefs across the country began reviewing their own department's responses to suspicious person calls, recognizing that federal oversight was now a reality for cases involving racial bias. At Georgetown University Law School, Professor Angela Davis used the Solis case as a teaching moment in her civil rights seminar. The bright classroom was filled with students taking notes as she analyzed the intersection of racial profiling and national security. What makes this case particularly significant, Professor Davis explained, is how it demonstrates the way individual acts of racism can have far-reaching institutional consequences. Susan Caldwell's personal prejudices didn't just harm Dr. Solis. They interfered with federal operations and potentially compromised national security assets. Student reactions reflected the broader national conversation the case was generating. Sarah Kim, a second-year law student, raised her hand. Professor Davis, does this mean that civil rights violations involving federal employees will automatically receive enhanced prosecution? That's exactly what the FBI director's statement suggests, Professor Davis replied. This case may establish new precedent for federal intervention in local policing when racial bias threatens national security interests. Back in the NASA cafeteria, Dr. Solis found himself surrounded by colleagues, offering support and sharing their own experiences with discrimination. The large windows filled the space with natural light as scientists and engineers from diverse backgrounds gathered around his table. Dr. Jennifer Wu, an aerospace engineer in her green blouse, spoke quietly about her own encounters with assumptions about her qualifications. Raymond, what happened to you was extreme, but the underlying attitudes you faced exist throughout our industry. Your courage in speaking out is giving all of us permission to address these issues more directly. Dr. Marcus Johnson, a propulsion specialist wearing an orange polo shirt, nodded in agreement. I've been stopped by security in this building more times than I can count, even though I've worked here for 12 years. They always want to see my badge twice, verify my clearance, check my appointment. My white colleagues walk through without a second glance. These conversations were happening in STEM facilities across the nation as Dr. Solis's story resonated with professionals who had silently endured similar treatment. The visibility of his case was creating space for broader discussions about racism in scientific and technical fields. At the White House, Press Secretary Amanda Chen addressed the growing national conversation during her daily briefing. Standing at the familiar podium under bright television lights, she fielded questions about the administration's response to the Solis case. The president believes that Dr. Solis represents the very best of American innovation and scientific achievement. The fact that a person of his caliber and contribution to national security could be treated as a criminal in his own neighborhood reflects systemic problems that require immediate attention and correction. The press secretary's comments elevated the story from a local incident to a national policy discussion about racial profiling, police reform, and the protection of federal personnel. Meanwhile, Susan Caldwell's attempts at damage control were failing spectacularly. Her attorney Janet Morrison had arranged a carefully scripted interview with a local news station, but Susan's responses only reinforced the perception of her as an unrepentant racist. Sitting in the television studio under harsh lights, Susan wore a red dress that seemed to emphasize her discomfort as the interviewer pressed her on the documented pattern of false reports. "Mrs. Caldwell, records show you've called police on 7 different people of color in your neighborhood over 18 months, but never once reported suspicious activity by white individuals. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Susan's rehearsed response crumbled under scrutiny. "I report what I see. If certain types of people are more often involved in suspicious activities, that's not my fault. I'm just trying to protect my neighborhood." The interviewer's follow-up was devastating. "Are you saying that NASA engineers, pharmacy delivery workers, and teenage students are inherently suspicious based on their race?" The interview clip went viral within hours, becoming Exhibit A in the case against Susan Caldwell and generating widespread public condemnation. Her employer, a local real estate firm, announced her immediate termination, citing concerns about liability and company reputation. As the day progressed, the institutional response to Dr. Solis's case continued expanding. The International Association of Chiefs of Police issued a statement condemning Officer Mercer's actions and announcing new training initiatives focused on implicit bias and proper evidence evaluation. Police departments in major cities began reviewing their policies for responding to suspicious person calls, implementing new requirements for documenting evidence before taking enforcement action. The case was becoming a catalyst for systemic reform that extended far beyond the initial incident. At Howard University, Dr. Solis was invited to deliver a virtual address to students in the engineering program. Speaking from his home office, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, he offered both encouragement and caution to the next generation of Black scientists and engineers. "Your education, your achievements, your contributions to society, none of these provide complete protection against racial bias," he said, looking directly into the camera. "But they do give you platforms to demand better, to speak truth to power, and to create change for those who come after you." The students' questions reflected both inspiration and concern about their future careers. Many expressed fear about facing similar treatment despite their academic achievements, while others found motivation in Dr. Solis's dignified response to injustice. As evening approached, FBI agent Nathaniel Bridges reviewed the day's developments from his field office. The muscular agent, still wearing his tactical gear from ongoing security operations, briefed his superiors on the expanding scope of the case. "Sir, we've identified potential federal civil rights violations extending beyond the initial incident with Dr. Solis," he reported. "Officer Mercer's pattern of discriminatory enforcement may constitute systematic deprivation of rights under color of law. We're recommending full federal prosecution." The decision to pursue federal charges against Officer Mercer sent a clear message to law enforcement agencies nationwide that racial profiling would face serious consequences, particularly when it involved federal personnel or national security assets. The day ended with Dr. Raymond Solis standing in his backyard, looking at the house he had almost been arrested for entering. The evening light cast long shadows across his property as he reflected on how quickly his private ordeal had become a public symbol of both injustice and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new interviews, and new opportunities to advocate for change. But tonight, for the first time in years, Dr. Raymond Solis felt truly protected, not just by federal agents, but by a community finally ready to confront the racism that had hidden in plain sight for too long. The story that began with false accusations in broad daylight had become a national reckoning with systematic bias, institutional accountability, and the power of speaking truth even when that truth was uncomfortable. Dr. Solis had become more than a victim. He had become a catalyst for the change his community desperately needed. The morning sun cast sharp, clean light through the windows of Police Captain Monica Ashford's office as she delivered the news that had been building for weeks. Officer Todd Mercer sat across from her desk, his uniform wrinkled and his face pale with the weight of impending consequences. The overhead fluorescent lights illuminated every detail of the scene that would mark the end of his law enforcement career. "Officer Mercer, effective immediately, you are terminated from the police department," Captain Ashford announced, her voice steady and professional. "The internal affairs investigation has concluded that your actions constitute a clear violation of civil rights protocols, department policy, and basic professional standards." Todd's hands trembled slightly as he processed the words. The federal civil rights charges filed by the FBI had already made headlines, but the finality of losing his badge and gun hit him like a physical blow. His union representative shifted uncomfortably beside him, knowing there was no defense for the documented pattern of bias and misconduct. Additionally, Captain Ashford continued, "You will face federal charges for violation of civil rights under color of law. The U.S. Attorney's Office has confirmed they will proceed with prosecution." The weight of justice finally being served sent ripples through the community that had watched this case unfold. Dr. Raymond Solis, wearing a crisp green shirt and blue jacket, stood in the NASA conference room where his colleagues had gathered for an extraordinary announcement. The overhead lighting and natural skylight from the tall windows created perfect visibility as his supervisor, Dr. Priya Lawson, prepared to deliver news that would transform his career. "Dr. Solis," she began, her professional attire complementing the formal nature of the occasion, "NASA leadership has reviewed your handling of the recent security incident, and we are incredibly proud of your composure, professionalism, and dedication to your work, despite facing unconscionable harassment." The room fell silent as she continued, "You are hereby awarded the NASA Distinguished Service Medal for your contributions to national security and your exemplary conduct under extraordinary circumstances. Furthermore, you have been selected to lead our new Advanced Satellite Defense Initiative." Raymond felt a surge of vindication wash over him. After weeks of having his credentials questioned and his presence challenged, his own organization was not only supporting him, but elevating him to new heights. The applause from his colleagues echoed through the conference room, a sound of professional respect that had been absent during his encounter with Officer Mercer. Meanwhile, across town in the courthouse, Susan Caldwell stood before Judge Patricia Wong wearing a red blouse that seemed to highlight her shame. Her husband, Frank Caldwell, was notably absent from the courtroom, having filed separation papers the previous week. The bright courtroom lighting left no shadows for her to hide in as she faced the consequences of her actions. "Mrs. Caldwell," Judge Wong addressed her, "you have pleaded guilty to filing multiple false police reports over a 5-year period. The court finds that your actions were motivated by racial bias and have caused significant harm to innocent members of your community." Susan's lawyer stood beside her, having advised her that pleading guilty was her only viable option given the overwhelming evidence. Detective Clifton Ramos had compiled a comprehensive file documenting her pattern of harassment that included 7 different incidents targeting Black and Latino neighbors. "You are sentenced to 6 months of community service focused on racial reconciliation programs, mandatory bias education classes, and restitution payments totaling $15,000 to be distributed among your victims," Judge Wong announced. "Additionally, you will serve 2 years of probation during which any similar complaints will result in immediate incarceration." The gavel's sound marked the end of Susan's reign of neighborhood harassment. Lucia Moreno, sitting in the gallery wearing a red dress, felt a sense of closure she hadn't experienced in years. As one of Susan's previous victims, she would finally receive acknowledgement and compensation for the harassment her family had endured. That afternoon, The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting in the community center. The fluorescent lighting created an atmosphere of serious business as residents filled every available seat. Board President Margaret Chen, wearing an orange top and blue jacket, addressed the packed room with an urgency born of federal scrutiny and community shame. "Fellow residents," she began, "the events involving Dr. Solis have revealed serious problems in our community that we must address immediately and comprehensively." The proposed policy changes were sweeping. A new Community Relations Committee would be established with Lucia Moreno as its first coordinator. Discriminatory harassment would result in immediate homeowners association violations and potential removal from the community. Cultural sensitivity training would become mandatory for all residents, and an anonymous reporting system would allow victims of bias to seek help without fear of retaliation. Dr. Raymond Solis attended the meeting, his presence now carrying the weight of federal protection and professional recognition. When he stood to address the community, the room fell completely silent. His green shirt and blue jacket gave him an authoritative appearance that commanded respect. "I want to thank those neighbors who supported me and spoke up when they witnessed injustice," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "But I also want this community to understand that what happened to me was not isolated." Lucia Moreno, James Patterson, Maria Rodriguez, and others have faced similar harassment for years. His words resonated through the crowd, many of whom were learning for the first time about the systematic nature of the discrimination in their neighborhood. The emotional weight of his testimony helped drive unanimous passage of the new policies. Back at NASA headquarters, FBI agent Nathaniel Bridges met with Dr. Raymond Solis in a secure conference room. The agent's muscular physique was evident beneath his professional suit as he delivered news that would accelerate Raymond's career trajectory. "Dr. Solis, I'm pleased to inform you that your security clearance review has been expedited and upgraded," Agent Bridges announced. "Your handling of this situation demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and character we need in personnel with access to our most sensitive programs." The irony was not lost on Raymond that being harassed and profiled had actually resulted in enhanced trust from the federal government. His composure under pressure had impressed FBI leadership, and his willingness to speak publicly about bias in STEM fields had made him a valuable advocate for the agency's diversity initiatives. Additionally, Agent Bridges continued, "You've been invited to speak at the National Security Innovation Conference next month. FBI Director Pendleton specifically requested your participation to address bias issues that may affect recruitment and retention of diverse talent in sensitive positions." The transformation from neighborhood suspect to national spokesperson felt surreal, but Raymond understood the importance of using his platform to help others facing similar challenges. His professional vindication was complete, but more importantly, it was creating opportunities for systemic change. Dr. Priya Lawson joined the meeting to discuss Raymond's expanded role. The Advanced Satellite Defense Initiative will have a budget of $200 million and a team of 50 researchers, she explained. "You'll be working directly with Pentagon officials and international allies on next-generation defense technologies." The promotion represented not just personal success, but professional validation that his expertise was valued at the highest levels. The contrast with Officer Mercer's interrogation of his credentials could not have been starker. Meanwhile, at the police department, Captain Monica Ashford was implementing the most comprehensive bias training program in the state. The Todd Mercer case had become a cautionary tale that would be studied in police academies nationwide. New protocols required officers to document reasonable suspicion before detaining anyone, and supervisory review became mandatory for all bias-related complaints. "We're partnering with local universities and civil rights organizations to ensure our training reflects current best practices," Captain Ashford explained to the assembled officers. The federal oversight resulting from the Mercer incident will continue until we demonstrate sustained improvement in community relations. The ripple effects extended beyond individual consequences to institutional change. The police department received additional federal funding for bias prevention programs, while the FBI began using Raymond's case as an example in their civil rights training curricula. As the week concluded, Raymond stood in his home office, reviewing invitations to speak at conferences across the country. Universities, professional organizations, and government agencies all wanted to hear his perspective on combating bias in technical fields. The same house where he had been treated as a criminal was now the headquarters for a growing movement toward inclusion in science and technology. The afternoon light streaming through his windows illuminated letters of support from colleagues worldwide. The international scientific community had rallied around his story, with researchers from dozens of countries sharing their own experiences with discrimination and expressing solidarity with his fight for justice. Agent Bridges had been correct in his assessment that this case would have lasting impact beyond the immediate participants. Todd Mercer's conviction would become precedent for federal prosecution of bias-motivated police misconduct. Susan Caldwell's guilty plea would be cited in housing discrimination cases nationwide. Most importantly, Raymond's professional success despite facing harassment would inspire other scientists to speak out against workplace discrimination. The comprehensive nature of the justice delivered sent a clear message that systematic harassment would face systematic consequences. From federal charges to professional sanctions to community policy changes, every level of society had responded to correct the injustices that had been revealed. As Raymond prepared for his first national conference presentation, he reflected on how completely the power dynamics had shifted. The neighbor who had questioned his right to live in his own home now faced probation and community service. The officer who had dismissed his credentials now faced federal prosecution. The community that had tolerated discrimination now mandated inclusion training. Justice had been served, not just individually but institutionally, creating lasting change that would protect future victims and prevent similar incidents. The recognition and accountability were complete, comprehensive, and transformative for everyone involved. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the congressional hearing room as Dr. Raymond Solis adjusted his green dress shirt and blue jacket, preparing to address the House Subcommittee on Science, Space, and Technology. 6 months had transformed everything about his life, starting with the gleaming new badge in his briefcase that read, Director, Advanced Defense Technologies Division, NASA. The promotion had come with security clearance levels he'd only dreamed of accessing, and responsibilities that would shape America's defense capabilities for decades to come. Dr. Solis, the committee chairwoman, began, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Your experience has highlighted critical vulnerabilities in how we protect our most valuable scientific assets. Can you elaborate on the systemic changes needed? Raymond leaned forward, his voice steady and commanding. Madam Chairwoman, distinguished members, what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a broader failure to recognize that harassment and discrimination against our scientific personnel constitutes a national security threat. When we allow bias to interfere with the work of our researchers, engineers, and innovators, we compromise America's technological superiority. The packed gallery behind him included Dr. Priya Lawson, now serving as his deputy director, wearing her signature red blazer. Agent Nathaniel Bridges sat in the front row, his muscular frame evident even in his formal suit, nodding approvingly as Raymond outlined policy recommendations that had emerged from their collaboration. The Solis Protection Protocol, Raymond continued, referencing the new federal guidelines bearing his name, ensures that personnel working on classified defense projects receive not just physical security, but protection from harassment that could compromise their mental health, productivity, and ultimately their contributions to national defense. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Lucia Moreno stood in the community center of what had once been a neighborhood divided by suspicion and prejudice. Wearing her red community coordinator polo shirt and dark slacks, she addressed a room filled with new residents from diverse backgrounds, their faces reflecting hope and curiosity rather than fear. 6 months ago, this community was known for something shameful, Lucia explained, her voice warm but firm. Today we're recognized nationally as a model for inclusive community building. The Harmony Heights Diversity Initiative didn't just change our policies, it changed our hearts. The transformation had been remarkable. Where Susan Caldwell's house once stood, with its perpetually closed curtains and unwelcoming demeanor, a young Latino family now tended a garden that supplied vegetables for the community food bank. The new residents, Maria and Carlos Vega, had moved in after learning about the neighborhood's commitment to inclusion and justice. Frank Caldwell sat in the back row, his presence still awkward but increasingly accepted. His own journey from enabler to advocate had been painful but genuine. Now serving as a volunteer counselor for families dealing with racism within their own households, he'd found purpose in preventing others from experiencing the destruction his family had endured. "I lost my wife to hatred I should have confronted years earlier," Frank shared during the community meeting's open forum. "But I've gained something more valuable, a chance to help other families recognize and address these toxic patterns before they destroy everything." In Washington, D.C., Captain Monica Ashford stood before a gathering of police chiefs from across the nation, accepting the National Award for Excellence in Bias Prevention. Her department's transformation following the Solis incident had become a blueprint for law enforcement agencies nationwide. "The Mercer case taught us that individual prejudice within our ranks doesn't just harm our community relationships," Captain Ashford explained to the assembled law enforcement leaders. "It creates legal vulnerabilities that can destroy careers, departments, and public trust. Our new protocols have reduced complaint incidents by 78%, while increasing community satisfaction scores to historic highs." Officer Todd Mercer's conviction had indeed become a landmark case, studied in police academies and cited in federal civil rights training. His 15-month sentence and permanent ban from law enforcement served as a stark warning to officers who might let personal bias override professional duty. Dr. Raymond Solis's influence extended far beyond policy chambers and community meetings. His story had sparked what colleagues called the Solis effect, a movement of STEM professionals speaking openly about discrimination and demanding institutional change. Universities reported increased participation in bias training programs, while tech companies competed to demonstrate their commitment to inclusive workplace cultures. At MIT, where Raymond had earned his doctorate, a new scholarship program in his name supported underrepresented minority students pursuing advanced degrees in aerospace engineering. The recipient selection committee included Dr. Priya Lawson, ensuring that the program would identify and nurture the next generation of diverse scientific leaders. The ripple effects continued expanding. Congressional hearings had led to the passage of the Scientific Personnel Protection Act, legislation that provided federal protections for researchers working on classified projects. The law specifically addressed harassment based on race, gender, religion, or national origin, treating such interference as a federal crime with serious penalties. Agent Nathaniel Bridges, now promoted to Assistant Director of the FBI's Scientific Security Division, oversaw implementation of the new protections. His team had prevented 12 potential harassment incidents in the first 6 months, using early intervention strategies developed from lessons learned during Raymond's case. As afternoon approached, Dr. Raymond Solis stood in his backyard, wearing a casual orange polo shirt and khaki pants, surveying the preparations for the community barbecue that had become a neighborhood tradition. The event, initially his idea for healing community relationships, now drew families from surrounding areas who wanted to experience the Harmony Heights model firsthand. Lucia Moreno arrived early, carrying a tray of her famous tamales, her red sundress bright against the clear sky. Agent Nathaniel Bridges and his family had driven down from the federal building, with his children already racing toward the bouncy house that Frank Caldwell had donated for the event. 6 months ago, I thought this neighborhood was beyond saving, Lucia confided to Raymond as they watched children of all backgrounds playing together. Now I look around and see what America could become if we all had the courage to demand better. Dr. Priya Lawson arrived with colleagues from NASA, their families blending seamlessly into the growing crowd. The sight of federal scientists sharing barbecue with community volunteers, former adversaries working alongside newcomers, and children playing without awareness of the boundaries adults had once maintained represented the transformation Raymond had sparked. Captain Monica Ashford stopped by during her patrol, accepting a plate of food while discussing the neighborhood's continued success with community leaders. Her officers, now trained in the protocols developed after the Solis incident, had become models for respectful community policing. As the sun began to set, Dr. Raymond Solis climbed onto a small platform that Frank Caldwell had constructed for community announcements. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward the man whose courage had changed everything. 6 months ago, I stood in this same yard, handcuffed and humiliated for the crime of coming home while black, Raymond began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled neighbors. Today I stand here as the director of NASA's most advanced defense technology division, surrounded by friends who see me for who I am rather than what their prejudices told them I must be. The crowd erupted in applause, but Raymond raised his hand for quiet. The real victory isn't my promotion or Susan Caldwell's conviction or Todd Mercer's punishment. The real victory is that Maria and Carlos Vega's children will grow up in a neighborhood where their presence is celebrated, not questioned. The real victory is that the next Dr. Raymond Solis won't have to fight these battles alone. Agent Nathaniel Bridges stepped forward, presenting Raymond with a framed commendation from FBI Director Harvey Pendleton, recognizing his courage in speaking truth to power and inspiring systemic change. But Raymond's attention was drawn to something more meaningful, his neighbors' faces reflecting pride, understanding, and hope. As families began gathering their belongings and saying goodbyes, promises were made for the next community event. Children exchanged contact information while parents discussed carpooling arrangements and shared babysitting responsibilities. The bonds formed through crisis had evolved into genuine community. Dr. Raymond Solis stood on his back deck as the last guests departed, watching Lucia Moreno coordinate cleanup efforts with volunteers who had once been strangers. Agent Nathaniel Bridges helped Frank Caldwell load folding chairs into his truck. Their conversation focused on preventing similar incidents in other communities. The transformation was complete, but the impact continued expanding. Tomorrow, Raymond would return to his laboratory, leading teams developing technologies that would protect American interests globally. But tonight, he savored something equally important: the knowledge that courage, when supported by institutional accountability and community commitment, could indeed change the world. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.